Good evening, everyone. I'm Governor John Carney. Thank you for joining us tonight for this Zoom town hall meeting about Wilmington, our proposal for a Wilmington Learning Collaborative. I'm joined this evening by Jim Simmons, who's the Director of Equity at the Department of Education for the state of Delaware. Jim and I and John Sheehan, who's not able to be with us because he's got another Zoom meeting tonight, have been doing this presentation for the last several months. We've presented to members of City Council, to the mayor, to members of the legislature. We had a Zoom meeting with members of the Delaware State Senate just this afternoon. We've had town hall meetings at Harlan Elementary, Bancroft, Warner, Pulaski. We've knocked doors on the east side around Bancroft, on the west side in Hedgeville and around Pulaski. On the north side, in the 9th Ward, around 28th Street and down towards Concord Avenue and that whole area. We've talked to parents. We've had Zoom meetings with teachers at Harlan, in Red Clay, and in Christina, who are teachers mostly in the city of Wilmington. We've met with the teachers' state organization, the DSEA, and others as well. We've met twice, not to present this slideshow tonight, but to talk about what we're planning to do. And I guess actually we did do the slideshow to the boards for Christina, Red Clay, and Brandywine. We've met with each of those boards twice, 3 times with Christina. And we continue to move forward. The idea for having this Zoom tonight, which is a unique one in the sense that'll be broadcast both in English and Spanish. And I think appropriately, this idea for having it in this format came from a first grade teacher at Lewis, the dual language school in the Red Clay School District. Used to be known, I always knew it as the Cool Springs School when my father worked in the district many years ago, but we're delighted to be able to bring this presentation to our audience tonight, again in English and Spanish. I understand that our friend Maria Matos has distributed invitations to the Zoom meeting tonight. We presented to Maria and members of the community many months ago and took a lot of input from a lot of people. And in fact, the request to do this Zoom meeting tonight came from that first grade teacher through our website, which is de.gov/WLC for Wilmington Learning Collaborative, de.gov/WLC. So if you have input or thoughts, go to the website and help us out. Fundamentally, this is an idea whose root is in creating collaborations among the three big school districts in the district, Brandywine, Red Clay, and Christina, which have the bulk of those students. It's fundamentally about providing a hyper focus for those children. Obviously, with the audience tonight, we have a lot of English learners and bilingual programs, and that's a focus, obviously, for the collaborative and something that really lends itself to this idea. So we very much appreciate you joining us tonight. And with that as an introduction, and by the way, you can ask a question or raise a concern through the chat as we go through this. Emily is with us and she'll read us those questions and comments after Jim finishes the presentation. So again, this is Jim Simmons, a former principal in the Brandywine School District, now our Director of Equity at the Department of Education for the state of Delaware. Jim.
Thank you, Governor. So I'm going to go through a series of slides that talk about this framework that we'd like to introduce and hopefully have our 3 big districts, Red Clay, Brandywine, and Christina, partner with us, but not limiting to those districts to participate. So this collaborative is a framework that's based on what you'll hear is innovation zones that are in Springfield and many other places around the country that have been relatively successful. And what we'd like to do is retrofit them into the city of Wilmington as a shell and then asked our partners, whoever those districts and/or schools that decide to participate with us or partner with us, to help build this from the ground up and get that input from those stakeholders as we build this process. So next slide, please. So these are a list of a few of the current challenges. And when I say a few, we know that there are many others, but in the city of Wilmington, we know that the city's students are divided amongst 4 different governances or LEAs or school districts, and 5 if you talk about Newcastle County VOTEC at the high school. We'll talk about that later on in the presentation. And because of that fragmented governance, oftentimes our transient population move between LEAs at different times. Sometimes even a block or 2 can cause a student or a family to have to go to a different school, a different structure, which means different curriculum, different operating systems, maybe even sometimes different bell schedules. So that's an issue. We know that the facilities are not all at the same level. We've invested money in Christina from a previous MOU to help bring those facilities up to a standard that I would call so that you have conducive learning environments. And then we have an issue around recruiting and retaining teachers, which is I'll talk about on the next slide. But all of those things and many other things lead to some low achievement rates and high absenteeism. Next slide, please. So here's a slide that has the data for the 3-year retention rate of teachers within the city of Wilmington at those city schools. And as you can see, that the state average is about 66%, and all of the schools within the city of Wilmington are below that state average. Here's what that means overall to a former principal and a current principal of those schools listed, is that every 3 years, you're turning over staff at a rate that you have to redo professional development. You're turning over staff at a rate that impacts comfort level around curriculum. You're turning over staff at a rate that impacts the ability to have a common climate and culture, and you're turning over those staff at a rate that impacts family engagement. All of those things are important, and so we hope that this collaborative we can address those things so that we can improve those numbers for recruiting and retention of teachers. Next slide, please. Thank you. So here's a structure that we talked about, this Wilmington Learning Collaborative, and we're not limiting it to Brandywine, Christina, and Red Clay. But what we're asking is those big 3 and others to participate with us to take this shell and fill in from the bottom up or from the boots on the ground up so that we can help build this together in a true partnership. It would require us to partner or create an MOU or memorandum of understanding between the districts, OGov, and the Department of Ed, so that we would create what that would look like and put that framework together. But again, have those people who are doing the work have input into what that MOU would look like. We would create an advisory board or a trustee board that would be made up in some parts of the superintendent from those cooperating districts and the board representative, but also include some community members, maybe retired teachers. We don't have all those details ironed out. And then that board would hire a small staff that would oversee the day-to-day operations of the collaborative. Again, I want to emphasize that those schools that decide to participate would not leave their district. They would remain in the districts that they currently operate in. And so we want to make sure that this is not a school takeover model. This is truly a collaboration where we're asking folks to partner with us and be part of a coalition of the willing to partner with us to build this together. Next slide. What could this look like? We talk about who participates. You've heard me say a coalition of the willing. We want people to volunteer, to partner with us, for us to gather their input and build this together. The governor may have mentioned, I think we've had 100+ meetings, 120+ meetings, and we've gathered feedback and input, and we've adapted and adopted some of that feedback and incorporated it into this presentation, which looks much different than it did when we started this at the beginning of September/October. We want to create this targeted support, which will create a hyper focus on the city of Wilmington. All of the districts have their school boards that I truly believe those folks have the best of intentions on supporting all of the children in their district. However, because of that structure that we currently have, it doesn't allow for them to create this hyper focus on just the schools in the city of Wilmington, which will have some similar problems, but also some different problems and concerns and issues that need to be addressed. And we hope that that targeted support can address that. We want to empower those people that have boots on the ground to have input into this decision-making, and that includes teacher leadership teams, that includes community engagement where they get to have some input into those decisions as well. Truly, we want this to be a collaboration where we're asking folks to come around, not only around the MOUs, but ongoing collaboration on day-to-day operations, decision-making operations that impact students directly. Again, I mentioned earlier that the schools who decide to participate will remain in their district. I think that's important for everyone to hear and for us to reiterate that this is not a takeover model. The last piece that I want to address is that this collaboration could create flexibility amongst those schools who decide to participate in how they hire staff, length of day, schedules, how that we can provide some enrichment opportunities for students, et cetera. Excuse me, next slide. So this is just a list of that 120 meetings that I discussed earlier. It's not all inclusive, but we've met with the school boards, we've met with community members, we've met with the legislator, both the city council, the mayor's office, and our state legislators and representatives, to name a few. But we've also met with community groups. We've had a number of town halls, we've met with teachers and parents, and so we continue to do so. Thus, here's a meeting that we heard feedback that we haven't reached out to our bilingual community, and so we took that feedback and created this presentation tonight, and we'll continue to do so. The governor mentioned that John Sheehan isn't here tonight. He's presenting to another group that we had booked at the same time, so we've divided and conquered so that we can get as many people knowledgeable about this, collect as much feedback broad-based across Newcastle County to hopefully make the best decision to impact the student achievement for students. Next slide, please. So we talked about additional funds, and initially this slide looked much different. The governor has put into his recommended budget that we hope will be supported by the legislator. I will say that thus far they've been very supportive of not only this, but of other initiatives. And so $7 million of that recommended budget would go towards supporting the recommendations that come out of the Reading Consortium. Another $7 million would go towards the Wilmington Learning Collaborative specific items that we would hope to fund so we can take that burden off of the districts that decide to participate. Next slide. So we've adjusted our timeline. Initially, we talked about trying to get this process up and running, create MOUs and start in the fall, but we heard from our stakeholders in these meetings that they thought that that was an aggressive timeline and that they would rather slow down and do it right than rush and maybe make some mistakes. And so what we'd like to do is use the fall of this year and school year 22-23 as a planning year, but place those funds in place so that we can have those funds available to start to do those things that would set us up for success as we move forward for year 23 and 24, with being that the first year of implementation. I think it's on the next slide, but what we're asking for now is for districts to agree and vote to participate in a formal discussion to create MOUs to be voted on later on. Christina School District has voted to formally engage with us at their last board meeting, and Red Clay and Brandywine have their votes on their decision coming up early part of February. Next slide, please. One of the things that we heard during those 120 meetings is the need for a high school part of this collaboration. We 100% agree. However, what we also know is that we don't want to wait to have an answer to that in order to move this forward. We're going to start here and have ongoing conversations around high school. We talked about some things that we can do in the interim while we have those discussions, talking about bridge programs that can help transition those current middle school students to high school as we try to figure out what that would look like, but make sure we develop a group to have those conversations around developing a long-term strategy around what the high school piece of this Wilmington Collaborative could look like. Next slide. So I mentioned this already. So our ask is we're asking school boards to vote to begin the discussion of the partnership and develop MOUs to be voted on later. We want to make it very clear that voting to participate with us formally and create MOUs does not commit them to saying that they're in. We're saying commit them to formally engaging and developing MOU that we then hope that they will support, but it doesn't commit them to anything at this time. Next slide. Oh, that might be our last slide. So what I will say is that at this point, the governor and I are going to field any and all questions that we can answer. Certainly, I know that we went through the PowerPoint relatively quickly. And again, not only are we here to answer questions, but to garner feedback that could be implemented or input into the presentation as we continue to move forward. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Emily and her team to present any questions to myself and or the governor. I also will put in the chat my contact information so that if someone doesn't have the opportunity to get their question answered or would like to speak to me one-on-one, they certainly have the opportunity to do that as well. So I'm going to turn it back over to the governor.
Yeah, before we get to the questions, and again, thank you to Jim for that presentation and for the expertise that he brings to this initiative with his experience on the ground as a teacher at the high school level, as a principal in the Brandywine School District, and with students that lived on either side of the Brandywine and Red Clay school district boundaries there, as he used to always say, around 30th Street on the north side. And so, again, the idea here, and first, again, let me thank the first grade teacher from Lewis Elementary, whose idea it was to have a Zoom meeting like this translated into Spanish and obviously in English as well, so that the whole community can understand what we are doing. We have knocked doors there over on the west side with a lot of bilingual households and parents and grandparents whose first language was Spanish, and had communication with them. Darrell Green, the superintendent of Red Clay, tells me that a large percentage of the students in Red Clay in the city on the west side are English learners. We do have additional funding for all districts across our state that goes to schools for their English learners and low-income students, which I know has helped districts across the state, from these Newcastle County districts through central Delaware and into southern Delaware, Indian River District, where there are a significant number of English learners. So we thank the interpreters that are helping us tonight, and all of you for joining, and we'll entertain any questions or comments that you have. So if you have questions, put them in the chat. Emily is pulling them off and will read them to us, and we'll do our best to answer the questions we get. One of the things that has been a struggle for us is this is a framework, as Jim described, a governance framework that really empowers local communities, the teachers and educators in those schools, and parents. And so people say, well, what is it going to look like? What are you going to do? And part of the answer is, well, those folks closest to the communities and the children will have a big hand in deciding what gets done there based on the MOUs that we develop with the districts. And so with that, Emily, if you have questions for us, we're ready to go.
Great. Thank you, Governor. The first question is going to come from Carol on Facebook. Carol asks, is the goal to create a school district within the city limits itself?
No, I wouldn't put it that way. What I would say, it is what we describe it is. It's a collaboration among 3 school districts that have schools and children in different parts of the city. It was the case that there used to be a single Wilmington public school district. It was determined to be unconstitutionally segregated by the federal court many years ago. And the court decided to separate, because the state was not doing it, to separate the district initially into one big district with 4 regions, and then into the 4 districts that we have today: Brandywine, Red Clay, Christiana, and Colonial. Christina, I mean. Christina is the only district that's not contiguous to the city. It's a greater, essentially a greater Newark district, and there have been many proposals to move the Christina district out of the city because it's not contiguous to it, and to put those children in that geographic area into the other districts. But this idea is to create some focus on the city without recreating a Wilmington public school district.
Our next question comes from YouTube. The question is essentially, how will this initiative help students who live in the city, that attend city schools but aren't city kids, or vice versa?
Well, again, if they're attending the schools that are in the city in the 3 districts, then they would be participants. They would be the recipient of whatever the governing board decides to do. Jim, any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I would also add that this is a start, and we hope that we can take whatever lessons learned and best practices from this collaboration and share those outward. And in years to come, maybe those shared outcomes can be used in other locations. I think that's a positive that could come out of this, so that therefore all students would benefit from the best practices that are learned from this initial start at a smaller scale.
It's important to point out that over 4 years ago, the state, the Department of Education, started our collaboration with the Christina School District. And in terms of reconfiguring the schools, working with the teachers, we have memoranda of understanding with both the district and the teachers to do things a little bit differently there, with this focus on the needs of these children. And this idea is to extend that collaboratively across the other 2 districts in the city.
Another question from YouTube from user Tara says, forgive my ignorance, will the WLC board members be elected officials, or will they be chosen by DOE and the governor? Are they existing board members from participating schools?
Yeah, the idea is to have them be appointed. There's talk about having the mayor with an appointment. We would have representatives from each of the districts, the superintendent, and I think 1 other board member. But some of that is to be decided. Jim, I think you know a little bit more about the specific details on the board itself.
Yeah, so each of the current school boards have a district board representative that oversees their city. And so we would have that person appointed to the board, as well as the superintendent of the participating districts, and then some different appointees, as the governor alluded to, that are to be determined. But we think community members that have educational experience. Certainly there's regulations around current teachers, but we certainly want to have input from the community and build a board, again, with a focus on what are the needs for the city of Wilmington.
And that's kind of the whole point on the governance side, is this hyper focus on these needs. As we talk to teachers and listen to them mostly, and as we knock doors and talk to parents, what we heard from teachers was they have lots of challenges in classrooms because of the challenges that children that are in those classrooms bring to it. and therefore they need additional resources to manage the classroom and some of these kind of non-educational issues. And so that's a pretty big deterrent for learning for many of the children. And so a real hyper focus to those kinds of things that the teachers that deal with them every day can provide a context around.
On that same topic, I wanted to share some pre-submitted thoughts from one of our constituents, Marcia. She says that you need a lot more teachers on this panel. They are the ones that know what needs to happen.
Yeah, I think fundamentally that's very much what it's about. We have I think a video of the Zoom that was held with some of the other districts across the country that are using a version of this model. And there was a presentation by the representative from the National Education Association that talked about just what that constituent was referring to, and that is to really empower teachers to who do this work every day. Jim, you've talked about these teacher learning panels. I think that's a good concept to go to this point being made by Marcia.
So Marcia, to Marcia's point, when I was in Brandywine as a principal, prior to it being a state mandate, we selected or decided to implement professional learning communities often referred to as PLCs, where all of the teachers around on a certain content would meet for 90 hours a week and plan together, talk about best practices, common assessments. At that time was just at the building level. It then became statewide, where it was a mandate, and we did it district-wide. And not only did we continue to do it in the buildings, but we did that across our district. We called them super PLCs, where content areas would meet for 90 minutes a week across our district at grade cluster levels. That concept is what we're hoping to do with this collaborative, having teachers around this, whether it's a grade level or a curriculum or professional development, come together around best practices, share those ideas across, in this case, multiple districts, hopefully, that we can bring the best practices, but getting that information from teachers, not from principals, not from administrators, but from community members, teachers who are doing the daily work with those students, telling us what they need so that we can incorporate that into the plan. So Marcia, you're spot on that we need more teachers, and that's what we hope to do, have teachers empowering. You heard me mention teacher leadership teams. So at the building levels, creating these leadership teams to have decision-making, input into the decision-making process at the building level. And so 100% want to have more input from teachers and those folks who are doing the work at the buildings, those closest to students.
I spent a whole day in half the day in Bancroft and half the day in Warner, and spent most of my time talking to teachers and educators there and listening to them describe the challenges that they face. And there were very consistent themes and the kinds of things that we expect to come from this, through this framework, to address these issues and to come up with solutions to the problem.
Governor, we have one of the users has 3 questions, so I'll ask the first 2 first and let you answer, and then go to the third. One of the questions is, what is the funding source for this initiative, specifically the staff and operations for the collaborative, educator time, professional learning, etc.? And then will the electorate have some say over that?
Yeah, so there are a lot of buckets for each of those. We are adding additional resources proposed in this budget, as Jim mentioned, for the small staff that we expect to put together to run the collaborative. We do have resources through what we call opportunity funding that goes to schools across our state and to these schools right now for low-income students and English learners. We are plussing that up significantly. We'll be doubling that over the next couple years, additional resources have been added by the legislature for counseling services, a ratio there that will result in additional resources. Obviously, the district put significant funds into these schools now. We know that. We have data to show that. A significant amount of Title I federal money goes to these schools as well, by virtue of the fact that they are identified as Title I schools with the number of low-income students that they have. Resources is really not the issue. I think effective and efficient deployment of those resources and the human capital there. I mean, Jim showed the slide that gave the retention rates in those, the average for the state, and then the difference. There we go. Next one. So you have Byard and Bancroft, where it's only a 30%, 30 to 35% retention rate in the first 3 years, meaning you're turning over that staff. We heard from teachers a lot about that. Frankly, at the town hall meeting we had at Warner, they kind of unloaded on us about the challenges that they face and the difficulty and all of that. And so part of it is to create a framework to hear those concerns, address them, and come up with ideas to correct the situation.
The second part of that user's question was, additionally, what cities or collaboratives are you looking to as an example of this partnership? You mentioned Springfield, any others?
Yeah, Springfield was the one that I participated in. We had a bunch of folks, I don't know, a dozen or so, a couple legislators, teachers, representatives of the district, and some DOE folks, some people from the governor's office, and it was very different in the sense that it wasn't multi-districts involved in the innovation zone. It was essentially the middle schools for the Springfield School District, and it was a solution that was required by, in that case, it was a state takeover, so to speak, of the school district, which is not what we're presenting here. But these concepts about governance and teacher involvement and innovative practices and all of that were parts of it. And we brought teachers with us who talked to the other teachers. They were very involved in the whole governing piece of it. I know we Jim and John and others had Zoom meetings with, I think they do it in Fort Worth, maybe Denver, one other place.
Oh, sorry, Governor, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Go ahead.
No, so Fort Worth, Waco, Texas, Denver, they were all on a virtual call with us, including Springfield, maybe the early part of December. I don't remember the date. It was a Friday, and we have that recording that's available to folks if they want to listen to the feedbacks and the questions that our district folks were able to ask and our community members were able to ask. It's also been implemented in Tennessee. They were not on that call, but we do know that in Tennessee and Memphis particularly, they've done it and had some success. So we've looked at all of those different places to see what were the commonalities that they had and that were successful, and tried to put those into this, as I said, this framework, and then trying to build it out from there.
But it needs to be said that the situation here is different and unique in terms of the history, in terms of the communities, in terms of the schools in the districts, being a multi-school district innovation zone or collaborative in this case. And so it does require, as Jim said earlier, an adaptation of the model. But the model itself, we've been very impressed with what we've seen in the essential elements of the model.
Next question from YouTube. Stepping back from words like collaborative and MOU, what are the main goals of this project?
Well, my main goal is to improve third grade reading proficiency. If we can do that, I mean significantly, because the proficiency levels right now are not very good at all. And we know there are other high poverty schools across Delaware who are doing much, much better. I mean, they're the best of those reading proficiency is at third grade level is in the 20 to 30% range. Well, that's just not acceptable for these children to be successful in life. You know, we know that you learn to read from preschool to third grade, and then you read to learn after that. If you're not prepared to read to learn by third grade, you're going to struggle afterwards. When we talked to the mayor about this idea, the mayor's a very strong supporter of doing things differently so we can get different results because of what he sees in these communities in terms of the poverty and violence. And it starts with, you know, educational failure among young people. And so this is a critically important issue. And that would be my goal, is to double or triple the third grade reading proficiency of the students in this collaborative.
And while that's the big goal, I think what facilitates getting to that goal is placing a higher level, a higher focus, a hyper focus on those issues to address the things that are impacting the ability to be successful. So having that hyper focus and putting the desired attention on the city of Wilmington, that's long overdue. This community around education and the structures that they have been lacking has been long overdue, but not because of the unwilling. Again, I've said this is not a blame game. This is a capacity issue. So we're hoping that this collaborative will provide some resources and build upon that capacity to put that hyper focus on those issues specific to the city so that we can impact those educational goals that the governor just spoke of.
And one other goal is right there on the screen next to Jim and I, and that is the retention rates for teachers. We know that in order to do better on those reading scores, that we have to do better in retaining the educators in our city and in these districts, because they're going to be more successful the longer that they stay, work together, get the professional development that they need, as Jim said, get greater experience with whatever the curriculum is, whatever the approach to reading instruction is, and all of that.
To build off that, I just wanted to share a comment we received before this town hall from Deborah, who said there is such a significant gap between students' actual grade level and academically at their lower grade level. So I guess a difference between where they are and what grade they're in. And I didn't know if you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, I think it's a big issue. You know, one of the things I was telling the story earlier today, and if you go on de.gov/WLC, you'll see a photograph of me talking to a little boy, a little fifth grader, sixth grader maybe. And I was asking him why he decided to move and leave Bancroft School. And he mentioned two things. One is he felt like he couldn't learn with so many of the distractions that were in the classroom. And the second thing that he said to me, which I didn't really understand at first, he said there wasn't enough education. And after I talked to him for a while, and one of the teachers that he knew well was taking around to these neighborhoods, kind of helped us understand what he was saying. And essentially what he was saying was that he learned probably after he left that the material that he was doing in whatever fourth grade was a lower grade level material, and that he was able to discern that as a middle school student. And so that goes to the point about trying to have high expectations for these children, give the teachers the resources that they need, give them the help that they need to manage their classrooms and provide the focus that the children need.
Just a few more questions here. Another question coming in from YouTube. Could you highlight one or two examples of things the collaborative could do for Wilmington schools that they can't do now? For examples, actions to address teacher retentions or students moving among LEAs.
Yeah, I'll ask Jim to address it too, because he knows it on the ground better than I. But the one that he describes a lot is the movement among the school districts. We have so many transient families living in the city that move around a lot between and among the school districts. That is a big issue. We have families that encounter all kinds of different housing and life challenges outside of the purview of the individual children, although dramatically affecting their lives. That's why we created a dual generation center at the old Stubbs Elementary School right there by Howard, where we try to provide assistance for the families, many of whom, significant number of whom are moving from one residence to another, and they don't have stable housing. They have challenges with employment, with social services, all of those kinds of things that really make the family situation very challenging for the younger children. Jim, other things that you can think of that to address that question?
Sure. I think that having this collaborative where those multi-district or co-district or tri-district, hopefully, collaborations mean that if and when folks become or families become transient, they're moving from one system to another system that looks similar and operates similarly to the one that they just left, reducing that impact on their education. I think the flexibility around class schedules, and when I say class schedule, meaning the opportunity to provide enrichment and be flexible with that schedule to offer opportunities that those students have not had the opportunity to have in the current structure, and to be able to create those opportunities. I have often said in the past that we have an achievement gap because we have an opportunity gap. And so this collaborative gives us the chance to provide those opportunities that those students have been missing for so long. So I think there's that flexibility in there that can help. And when I say that, because we talk about schedules, in no way do we want to have teachers working longer days and or have students going to school longer. But what we do during the hours that we have them, that we can do some different things that can provide those opportunities, whether it's from community groups, nonprofit organizations, to be able to support their learning and enrich their learning so that it ties back to the curriculum that they're learning in the classroom.
And you talk about that a lot, Jim, in terms of enrichment with community organizations, the Boys and Girls Club, the LACC. I know the LACC has had good partnership with the schools there on the west side. And those kinds of partnership can extend beyond the current school district boundaries with a collaborative like this.
Yeah, what we've seen is that those community organizations are often linked to a certain section of the city or a certain school district, as in the example you just gave with the Latin American Community Center working with the west side of the city and predominantly with Red Clay. The Powell Center West working primarily with Brandywine, and then United Way with Christina. And not that they're limited to those, but what we hope is in a collaboration that the collaborative, not only with the school districts would be in place, but now the collaboration between those nonprofit and community organizations can be in place. So the things that they're offering to a specific different district or area can now be citywide. I think that's a huge opportunity to address some of those enrichment opportunities.
Another user on YouTube asks, how do you plan to stress the importance of readings when families may not value that as part of their education? And then how is the collaborative going to increase school attendance? So I think two separate questions there. One, how do you plan to stress the importance of reading? The second, how is this going to address school attendance?
Yeah, so really, really great questions and two big issues. And I'm going to take school attendance first because, I learned when I was in Congress, so it's got to be more than 5 years ago, in a visit to Shortledge, sitting around the table with the teachers and listening to their concerns about what the children needed. And one of the things that was observed was that they had a significant, and Jim mentioned it on one of the earlier slides, absentee issue, and not just an absentee issue, but an issue where a lot of students were missing the first block in the morning and not coming to school until later in the morning. And the first block was reading. That's a perfect example of, okay, how can we as a collaborative really address these attendance absentee issues and issues of students who aren't arriving at school in time for the first block. I'm not suggesting that I have solutions to that, but here's a collaborative who identifies this as being a significant problem, which may not be a problem in Pike Creek and Hockessin and other neighborhoods, but here it's a significant problem in terms of lost learning. With respect to reading, I think I've been telling my staff that we need to do, much like then Governor Carper, now Senator Carper, put a major focus on mentoring, putting a hyper focus on reading, particularly among our younger children. We know that a lot of families don't have a lot of reading material in their homes, and so my wife Tracy has been working on this Dolly Parton Imagination Library program. They do partner now with I think Christina and some of the other school districts, providing books and reading material for the children. The bottom line is that I've learned that there's a way to teach reading. It's not just give a child a book and tell them to read, but to teach them how to read and then to provide them with reading material and encouraging them to do it. I think that we ought to have a summer reading contest where children can win prizes and get incentivized to read books when they otherwise wouldn't. I'm not certainly an expert in all that, but those are two areas I think where we need to really provide a focus for these children. Jim, thoughts on that one?
I think you hit it on the head, but we did do some of what you talked about last summer. The accelerated learning plan from the Department of Ed addressed it, giving every student access to an electronic library card so that they could get books online. But also out of my office, we bought a number of books and had a number of book drives, not just to give a book, because again, to your point, there's 2 points: teaching them to read and then having reading materials. We address the reading material piece as well. We're looking at the science of reading in different areas, and the Librarians Association of Delaware has been extremely supportive of helping us with that as well. We also had some learning walks to just try to, story walks, where we had in 3 different parks, one in each of the counties, where we tried to promote reading, where as you're outside and you're exercising, you could read along the walk, hopefully a story that would pique your interest and make you want to go and get that book. And if that's an issue, hopefully be able to get that book to you. So again, not having all the answers, but addressing some of those issues at points where we can.
And one of the other things I just remembered in the recent report that we had at the Family Services Cabinet Council was significant resources made available to a program called Reading Assist. And as I understand it, it's a tutor that can be made available to students who need additional help. The idea was it was using federal money because so many of the students were missing in-person instruction during the COVID shutdowns of last year. And so these resources and Reading Assist would help them, instruction for reading for the younger children. I want to say younger than 3rd grade, as I understand the report, but those kinds of resources for the children to get them where they need to be.
So Governor and Jim, we have just 2 more questions here. One being, would one of the goals be to create a standard curriculum for the participating school districts in order to avoid the loss of information of those students who move often?
So I initially used that as an example, and to the governor's point, I don't think that's up to us to decide. We certainly would support if that's something that the collaborative felt was necessary. But one of the things I think that in lieu of, if the districts don't decide to have a common curriculum, I think it could be, what are those instructional frameworks that could be a commonality? I think another commonality could be, what's the professional development around classroom management, because they're seeing similar classroom behavior. So I wouldn't eliminate curriculum from the district or from the collaborative, but I think the collaborative would decide that. More importantly, though, I think, what are those other things that are commonalities? I'm gonna say, do a needs assessment to find out what are the true needs that go across them all, that we could support through the collaborative to help support them. Curriculum could be a piece of that, but it may not be. I don't want to put that as a guarantee.
Great. And the last question comes from a user on YouTube saying, how can I help? And I guess, where can folks find additional information about the Wilmington Learning Collaborative?
Yeah, so additional information, I mentioned the website earlier, de.gov/WLC, as in Wilmington Learning Collaborative. That'll take you to a website connected to the governor's office, and you can get information there. And it's an opportunity to provide some input. There are public meetings that we've been attending of the school boards, and there will be school board meetings in February in Red Clay and Brandywine. As Jim mentioned earlier, Christina, as a board, has already voted to enable the superintendent to engage with the Department of Education to establish a memorandum of understanding to move the collaborative forward. That would have to be approved once again. Let your voice be heard, whatever your view is with us, so we can take into consideration your ideas, and let your voice be heard at the school board level with those members who will be voting to allow or enable their superintendent, Darrell Green, in the case of Red Clay. And so that's what I would recommend, is and also to reach out and continue to learn more about it. If you have the interest in becoming a mentor at one of the schools, or getting involved in programs to help encourage children to read, that would be helpful as well.
And I've put my contact information in the chat, so that if you have suggestions, comments, or to this point willing to help, feel free to reach out to me via email or my cell, and we can discuss those individually, or as if it's a group, willing to help and support as well. So we're certainly available, and make ourselves available to anyone who's willing to reach out, whether it's feedback, whether it's questions, and/or support.
And I would mention one other thing. There is a commission that's operating right now called the Reading Commission, which is co-chaired by Senator Tizzy Lockman and former Attorney General Matt Denn. They're working on a lot of these issues as well. I would encourage you to contact the members of that commission and pay attention to the work they're doing. And if you like this idea, we think it's very consistent with whatever they might decide to do. And we think that their work could build on this. In the meantime, as they're dealing with issues that are maybe more challenging, we're going to be making progress on third grade reading proficiency, on collaboration, and hopefully moving the ball for our students across the city.
That was our last question of the night. So back to you, Governor.
Yeah, so again, just to close out with a couple thank yous. Thank you for our two interpreters. We appreciate this is a new format for, at least for me, I assume for Jim as well. It's not one we've used before. I think it's a good format, because we get an English version, and then we get the translation into Spanish. We have a lot of Spanish-speaking citizens and parents in the city of Wilmington, particularly on the west side of the city, and particularly in the Red Clay School District. Again, our thanks to Maria Matos and her team at the Latin American Community Center for their support and for getting the word out. And to all of you for joining us. This is a really important issue. You know, the success of our to state the obvious, the success of our city and state really depends on the success of our children and our schools, and the education that they get that enables them to be successful in life. As I think about my responsibilities as governor and the challenges that we face, I think, you know, it comes down to two big things. One, making sure that every family, every person in our state has a good job so they can support themselves and their families. So a strong and robust economy and job market, and then schools that enable our children to be successful as well. This has got to be right up there as certainly the most important issue for me in my final 3 years as governor. Again, we appreciate you joining us. Thanks again to the first grade teacher there at the Lewis School. And we appreciate any help that you can provide for us as we move forward. Thanks again, and good night.